Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual meeting of Hammersmith and Fulham's Finance, Commercial, Revenue and Contracts Policy and Accountability Committee. I'd like to welcome members, officers and observers who are joining us online. I'm Councillor Helen Rowbottom. I'm a councillor in Hammersmith and Fulham and chair of this committee. Before we begin tonight, I just have a few housekeeping notices for everyone. Firstly, please could you keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. Secondly, please wait for me as chair to prompt you before speaking, and please place all questions through me as well. If you'd like to speak at any point, please indicate by virtually raising your hand. And I realise that not everyone necessarily has the facility to do this, so do speak up if you're unable to do this. We've got officers, external guests and observers here this evening, so if you'd like to speak, please just introduce yourself first. And finally, please could we avoid using the chat function, only because not everyone can access this and it can create a bit of a dual dialogue. So if we stick to hands up, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much. So I will go straight in and start with the minutes of the previous meeting. I just wanted to initially ask whether the committee approve, as held as an accurate record, the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January 2021.
Yeah, approved.
Great, thank you very much. And secondly, the minutes of the meeting from the 18th of November last year in 2020.
Yeah, also.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I am next going to move to apologies for absence. I've only had one apology for absence from Councillor Morton, and wondered if anyone else is aware of any. If not, that's the only one that I'm aware of.
Chair, I have no other apologies to report.
Great, thank you very much. And next I'll move to the roll call and declarations of interest. I'll go through all of the committee members. Please could colleagues just respond by saying present if here, and declare any interests, and if so, in relation to which item, and if not, please just say present. So to start, Councillor Patricia Quigley.
Sorry, present.
Thank you. Councillor David Morton's obviously given his apologies. Councillor Guy Vincent.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Donald Johnson.
Present.
Thank you. And now on to the co-optees. Tony Boyes.
Present.
Thank you. Eric Hoppenstein.
Present.
Chris Littmoden.
Present.
And Judith Worthy. Not sure if we've got Judith now. Perhaps still trying to get online, so hope to have Judith join us shortly. So we'll move on to the substantive items for tonight. We've got two main items. The first is our draft equalities plan for 2021 to 25. And secondly, we've got an item which segues nicely from our last meeting on the 2022 budget context. So in the interest of time, I won't be able to introduce absolutely everyone on the call, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank officers for joining tonight and providing support in their areas of expertise. We have with us Councillor Max Schmidt, who is the Cabinet Member for Finance and Commercial Services. And I'd also like to welcome senior officers from the Council, including Emily Hill, who's our Director of Finance. So we will start with item 4, which is the Council's draft equalities plan for 2021 to 25. This has recently been launched and is currently open to public consultation for a 12-week period until the end of April. So the committee is asked to note and comment on the plan, which will frame and set the kind of borough direction for progressing equality of opportunity over the next 4 years. It's being sent to all of our packs to inform kind of how we shape policy making across the council, which is very much the purpose of this pack. So we'd like to welcome this report, particularly given the impact that the last year has had on worsening equalities and outcomes for many groups and people in the borough. So please could members and co-optees just note the proposals, make any suggestions, and then consider this in the future as a lens for anything that we develop as part of this pack. So I'd like to hand over now to the presenting officers, which will be Emily Hill, Director of Finance, supported by Kim Smith, who's our Chief Executive and the SRO for the project, and also Councillor Sue Fenimore, who's our Deputy Leader and the lead member for this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emily Hill, Director of Finance.
As you've introduced, Chair, the Council is required to publish its equalities objectives every 4 years, and the report in front of the committee today brings members and co-optees and the public's attention to the draft equalities plan for 21 to 25. And as you say, that is currently out to public consultation. The consultation was launched on the 1st of February for 12 weeks, and as you have said again, closes at the end of April. And so we are asking the committee to note and comment on the draft equalities objectives within the report, which sets the direction for our progress of progressing equality of opportunity across the borough over the next 4 years. Members will also be aware of the Council's public sector equality duty, and that requires public bodies to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination and advance equality of opportunity and foster good relations between people. And that duty applies to all the 9 protected characteristics listed in paragraph 14 of the report. So that covers age, disability, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, marriage and civil partnership. So across all of those protected characteristics. The Council's vision is to become the most inclusive borough in the country, where every and all our residents feel valued, they can access all opportunities fairly, and are free from discrimination and inequality. And our work to make this a reality is in our policies, our actions, and in our passion for those opportunities. So the report sets out the proposed 5 key objectives. They are in the report, but I'll just highlight these now. That everyone in our borough must feel valued when the COVID-19 pandemic ends. And we've seen the sort of differing impact of COVID-19 on people with those protected characteristics. Removing barriers to inclusion, ensuring that our services tackle the disproportionate impact on young people of the risks of street crime and exploitation by gangs, improving opportunities for all, and becoming an employer of choice and fostering greater inclusion within the council. So it is out to consultation. The plan is published on Citizen Space, which is our consultation platform, but also we've been promoting that through our social media channels, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor, and our e-news and our website. We're running open sessions for our staff to join in with the conversation. I attended one myself recently, we're also engaging with schools through the Youth Council, Secondary School Head Teachers Forum and the Youth Network. So you've got the report in front of you, and we welcome the committee's comments on the draft objectives, which will frame our work and our priorities and our agenda over the next 4 years. We'd also encourage committee members to encourage others to participate in our online consultation survey if you haven't already done so. Just as an aside as well, the Public Service Reform Policy and Accountability Committee is meeting on the 7th of April, and that will be considering 2 quite detailed equalities reports. One to update members on the equality, diversity and inclusion work that we've done in the last year within the council, and the impacts on our workforce, and a wider report covering some of the activity across the council that will impact on the residents of our borough. So you may be interested to log in and watch that one as well, which will give some more detailed information on what the council is doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Emily. Are there any other speakers who would like to just speak to their lens on this report, or shall we go to comments? Okay, I will go to comments, and we can feel free to chip in, either Kim or Councillor Fenimore at any stage if you'd like to. So I can see a hand up from Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emily, for that summary. I just wondered, on the protected characteristics, is this exercise restricted to addressing protected characteristics, or do we have an opportunity to be more proactive in other areas where we are aware of inequality or deprivation?
The actual sort of legal obligations are around those protective characteristics, although often, and as we all know, that people aren't often characterised just by one of those, but a multiplicity of things and a multiplicity of experiences, possibly with some of those other areas potentially that you're talking about. So I think it's possible, sort of in that sort of intersectionality piece, that we would pick up some of those other areas that you're talking about. I'm not clear exactly which ones you might want, but certainly that might be something that you could very welcome to raise for the consultation, so that we can consider any of those particular characteristics that you might think that we would otherwise overlook.
Thank you. Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
It was just, I mean, in particular, this local authority used to, and I'm sure may well still do, but used to refer to a category, disenfranchised white boys, who there's a community of lads out there who don't perform so well at school. They fall into a trap of sorts, and they end up with poor life outcomes, and it doesn't go too well for them. And that was recognised as a category of group. I was formerly the chair of the Education Select Committee back in the day, and we used to look at this. And I just wondered, from a community, a cohort of citizens within our reach, that there has to be opportunities that the local authority can reach out to them with. I was just hoping that sort of thing would be included.
I think that could. Oh, sorry, Kim.
Sorry. Just allow me to come in on this. My name's Kim Smith, and I'm the Chief Executive here at Hammersmith and Fulham. I just want to be absolutely clear that two of the objectives are about improving opportunities for all, and the other objective is about tackling inequality for all. And I think that what's important in this document, when you get a chance to have a look at it, is that it's in draft, but it very clearly says that everybody in our borough must feel valued when the pandemic ends. So I want members of the committee and the public listening in to understand that some of the root causes of inequality in a borough like ours, around deprivation, around discrimination, around poverty, it's really important that we understand that it impacts right across all of the residents in different ways. What Emily's pointed out is really important. These are the protected characteristics, which we by law need to be clear about and specify how we are responding and what actions we're taking to make sure that they don't get left behind. But you would expect in a compassionate council like Hammersmith and Fulham that our goal, our ambition around economic prosperity for all and inclusion for all is very much talking about white young boys and every other community. And perhaps I might urge the committee to, in your feedback, tell us about the communities or the groups that you think might not be as visible, rather than us try in this committee to try and count that sort of Noah's Ark approach to making sure that every single group is counted.
Great,
Thanks for that, Kim. Did you want to, oh sorry, Councillor Johnson, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, I'm pleased to hear it. Thank you. Yes, I think that's a good shout, Kim.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Emily, did you want to respond on that point before we move to Eric's question?
Thank you. It was just to add to Kim, as Kim said, we've picked up in the objectives, everyone must feel valued and improving opportunities for. I think in terms of the group that Councillor Johnson picked up as well, we could probably look at that as being covered under ensuring that our services tackle the disproportionate impact on young people of the risks of crime and exploitation by gangs. So, some of the part of what you were talking about is picked up by age and the protected characteristics of age, which will be both young and old and everyone else in the middle as well.
Thanks for that, Emily. And actually, I might just abuse my chair's privilege a little bit just to pop in and say that I know that we have quite detailed data analysis from our BI team about particular groups where, there are inequalities that are national issue or regional, whatever, but we have a couple of pointers as well. Off the top of my head, there was it's kind of progression from after post GCSEs onto further education or apprenticeships, and there's single women returning to work after having children. So there are a couple of things that I just picked up, but it would be great to see the data behind some of this as well. But I'll move on to Eric next, who's been waiting patiently. So Eric. We can't hear you, Eric, if you're speaking. Oh,
I lost my cursor.
No worries.
Thanks very much, and it's really interesting to read it. I had a couple of sort of questions, which was, what happened after the last one? Obviously, this happens every 4 years, because, and that's sort of my sort of first part. Other bit is how many people have actually sort of, I mean, I hadn't seen it, that means nothing, but how much reach and how many people have come back so far? And obviously with COVID, people aren't necessarily looking, or things might not have the same sort of breadth and scope. Is it, have there been lots of people looking at this, and is there a good cross section of input, or does one need to look at a slightly longer time frame? But I mean, but the two things I really wanted to come back with was on inclusiveness and the vision statement, and not to get into, I know this is a draft document, but one of the things that I try and do with a lot of government clients is, when someone comes to me with a vision statement, which is we want to be the best, I usually throw it back at them, because you're always trying to be better than someone else, rather than actually really looking and defining exactly what you want to be. So I think there was a similar statement from the government today on a different topic, but on the racial side, that we want to be the best. I think one needs to focus on who we want to be, rather than just trying to always compare ourselves to other people and just be better than other people.
Thanks, Eric. And would anyone like to come in and speak to the kind of legacy piece? Kim?
Yeah, if I start off, and then maybe Councillor Fenimore might want to come in. No, we don't know how many people have so far responded to the consultation. Giving 12 weeks allows a good amount of time, and as Emily says, we've tried to publicise far and wide so that people have an opportunity to have their say. This is a draft document. We've tried to produce a document that's going to have a wide reach. So some of the detail around data and some more detailed stuff around action plans will go into the completed document. But this has been produced as a consultation document. The point about what have we achieved so far with the last plan? The last plan was very much focused around employment opportunities, doing more around developing apprenticeship starts, working well with employers to make sure that Hammersmith and Fulham becomes known as a place where there are employment opportunities for all. We also have done quite a bit of work around disability. That was in the last one. So each time we've produced this document, equalities for all and equal opportunities, removing barriers for inclusion, is a piece of work in progress. And that's why it very much features in this one. And it comes back to the earlier question about making sure that no communities are left behind. And this is very much an offer and an approach that should resonate with every single resident in the borough. In terms of the last point about we want to be the best and what that might mean, then clearly the KPIs, the key performance indicators that will sit behind the action plan will tell us what does success look like. But I think that on this topic of inequality, justice and fairness, which is very topical today, there are a lot of people from various minority communities who've got quite a high level of fatigue about some of the promises and some of the rhetoric. We found that particularly to be true around vaccination hesitancy and the differential impacts with different communities. So by having an aspirational statement about wanting to be the best, I think it's quite important that in our reach to residents, we make quite a bold claim so that people understand that we take this very seriously and that we will work to strive to deliver on it.
Thank you very much, Kim. Councillor Fenimore, you had your hand up briefly at some point. Did you want to come in, or was that covered off in Kim's response? We can't hear you if you are speaking, but if not, I'll move to the next speaker.
It's me. I'm sorry.
Oh.
It's the end of the week and I forgot the mute button.
No
Normally
problem.
I sit there and think, oh, she's got the mute button, but I'm afraid it was me tonight. So forgive me for that. It's just a long week. I really can't add much more to Kim's statement. Absolutely spot on. I don't have a problem with aspirational statements, actually. I think it's absolutely right that the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham know what our ambitions are. And I appreciate the nonsense that's come out from government today on their report may cloud some of that view. But actually, it's about actions, isn't it? It's about what you do in the actions. And as Kim quite rightly says, those KPIs are really important. I was, for a very long time, before becoming deputy leader, cabinet member for social inclusion. I think we were the only council in the entire country who had a dedicated member working on equalities and inclusion. And I'm really excited by the work that we have managed to achieve. But I think what this statement is saying is something bigger, bolder, more exciting, more accessible, actually. I think very often some of these are very inaccessible to residents of Hammersmith and Fulham. And it's an opportunity over the last couple of years with Black Lives Matter, women's equality, etc., to have a wider conversation with the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham, which will then hopefully inform us going forward. I make no bones at all about the statement from this council. We will not tolerate any form of racism or hate crime in Hammersmith and Fulham. We have a dedicated hate crime coordinator. That's how seriously we take it. And off the back of that, we know that young people, particularly sort of in their teenage years, who have been coerced and effectively taken into gangs against their wills and against their families' will. And I'm not prepared to stand by and let that continue. We've got a huge amount of work going on our new gangs unit, which is a bespoke partnership with the Metropolitan Police, and they are working really hard and doing some excellent different ways of working in relation to gangs. I don't know if anybody saw some of the programmes. Certainly there's one on BBC One last night about the gangs issue. It's absolutely shocking and horrendous, and I really am very happy to make bold statements. It's what we do about those bold statements that makes it important to me, and I take that as important as the actual work that we will do to get this as far as we can absolutely right. So the consultation is really important. It's an opportunity for us to hear from residents about what their views and thoughts are, and we really want to hear from as many people as possible. It's absolutely timely to do this, and I'm excited by the journey. This, as we say, is the start of a bigger conversation, but I'm really pleased to see a vast and wide array of inequalities and exclusion being tackled within that document. And I passionately believe in social justice. It's the only reason I ever got into politics was around social justice. And this is something that we will, as an administration, be working extremely hard to do everything we can. So we can claim the very bold claim that we are an inclusive borough. And I'm excited by that journey and that bit of work that we're going to be doing soon. It's probably enough from me.
Great, thank you so much, Sue. I think you raised a good point. Some of these things we can undoubtedly track and cover in metrics. Some of it is invisible to data, as we know, for some of the most vulnerable. So that's why anecdotal and collective experience inputted by this process is so valuable. So thank you so much. Councillor Quigley.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who had an input on the draft plan. It's really, really good. It's a good read. I only have one question, and I'm sorry, but I don't know. Maybe I should know this. Is this draft plan available in easy read?
Would anyone like to come in on response? Kim.
Kim Smith again, Chief Exec at Hammersmith and Fulham. We're using a platform called Citizens Space, and it is an accessible platform and easy read, and a number of other ways in which access to translations, accessible visual print, that we have. I can send you on, Councillor, a list, and forgive me that I can't name them all off the top of my head, but there are definitely a number of channels and a way in which the equalities plan should be as accessible to everyone who wants to access it. And I'm happy to forward that to you after this meeting.
If you could, that'd be great. It's just what I just want to make sure that that particular cohort people, because we're looking for everybody's views, so I think they have as much say on it. Okay, thanks, Kim.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Councillor Quigley. And next, Councillor Fenimore, did you want to come in on that? Or
yeah, I mean, thank you, Patricia, for raising it. It's a really important point. We had lots of conversations while we were getting this together around inclusion and what that means. And as a dyslexic person, I know that accessibility matters, but we made it very clear from day dot that if we're asking for residents to be able to comment on an equalities document, it has to be equal for all. So if for any reason there is an issue, I would dearly love to speak to you, because it was absolutely clearly set out at the get-go that that's what we were going to do. But I'm really grateful for your comment, because it is absolutely, it would be somewhat absurd, would it not, for us not to do that? So maybe you and I can have a chat outside. That would be really helpful outside this meeting. Yeah.
I just couldn't see from what I was reading. I didn't want to assume, so I don't do that.
Good. Never assume. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay,
thanks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Tony.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick comment. So I'm pleased to see the document is, as you pointed out, it's intelligence-based. So, and you can see that. So it's looking at specific issues which seem to be most prevalent in Hammersmith and Fulham, which is great. It's very broad, and it's looking at specific activities to improve inclusion. And what I most like is that some of this work has already started, as Councillor Fenimore said. So we had an excellent presentation on the gangs unit from Gemma, who runs it, to our ward panel meeting, which was very well received. And so my point is, I think it's great that it started this work already. And I would suggest if we can review this as keep this a living document, then that will help us to make sure we don't lose sight of it. And particularly, so as the Chief Executive said, there will be KPIs on this. So it's not just a sort of a wish list. There'll be specific metrics that measure how well it performs. And that will be great if we can see those at some stage, maybe even as short as 6 or 9 months into the future. It does very rightly point out this is a critical time. We'll be coming out of lockdown. COVID will be coming out. People will be more on the streets. So it would be really great if we could see more of this in future packs, if that's possible.
Thank you so much for that, Tony. You've anticipated my sort of final point, which is it would be great to have, obviously it's in a consultation period at the moment, but it would be brilliant to have nuts and bolts of a financial lens on it, whether we've got metrics or particular things to bear in mind, particular inequalities that come out of any analysis you're doing, and we can have it as a lens of how we scrutinise policy coming from this pack, or how we form it as well. So that would be great. And Councillor Fenimore, hands gone up.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
No, go for it.
Just to be clear, the reason why both Kim and myself are at every single pack this month is because we take it that seriously. So we are presenting this document at every single policy and accountability committee. And I envisage at some point we will come back and update every single policy and accountability committee, because it's absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily sit in one place. It may well sit in one pack better than others, but the implications are across the whole council, and particularly around finance. Absolutely agree. So very, very happy to come back to you. I'm not going to say how long it is, because I want to make sure that the work we've done in relation to the consultation, that we have enough. We may go and want some more consultation, but I promise you, as soon as we can get it to you and there's evidence and information for you to see, certainly we will bring it back to you, no question.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Eric.
I just wanted to sort of bring into that, one of the things, and I'm not sure how much Councillor Fenimore is into this, but one of the things that we've been looking at as a pack is this whole idea of, what is the return on investment or return on people's money and council tax, and it would be great to bring together the KPIs that this is a value to citizens, that they have this support, that they have this development, that they have all the elements, and when we're looking at the KPIs, bringing those together, if there is a possibility of bringing this together, it would be a clear sign of how we are delivering value.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Eric. I'll scribble that down. That's a great point. We'll augment that. And Councillor Johnson, we've got another point from you, and then I'll go to mine. Councillor Johnson, not sure if it's
my turn to be the Muppet. Don't worry. I think companies and organisations are realising that the diversity inclusion category can't be a silo anymore. It has to be integrated. And I would just like to hope that the local authority would consider this aspect in the broader sustainability context, thinking about, and there's a paragraph in the report talking about post-COVID, but also the recovery with the green agenda and the move towards the climate targets and the council's own environmental action plan. And there has to be opportunities in there. The broader recruitment strategies from the local authority, how does it fit in there? And all the other areas where we're looking to grow and have a sustainable resource for citizens delivering value. So I mean, that was just a comment really, rather than just see it as an isolated piece of work. I would hope that there's a mechanism that shows how it's integrated across the board, and not just a sort of, I don't want to say a tick box thing, but just a package that addresses that one aspect. It has to be integrated. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I know there's lots of practical work already ongoing to embed it all across work already, but the document does the talking on that one, so I'll leave that one there. And Kim, did you want to come in response to that?
Just a quick point, if I may, before Chris, just to endorse the 2 points about return on investment and value. We often talk in councils about hard to reach communities and the inability of people to access services. And the whole inclusion agenda is very much talking about how we could do better, perhaps on some of those not convinced communities rather than hard to reach ones, because I think that the inefficiency of some of our services and the cost behind demand failure management is something that we need to better understand. And I think with COVID, we've particularly understood well that some of the messaging and some of the ways in which people understand well their approaches to vaccinations, for example, is not always through the channels that we assumed, as in the council telling people how to do things. So there's a real added value in understanding the needs of our residents, understanding the various and diverse needs, and including all of those in order to deliver better services. So very much the KPIs will be as much about how much we're spending, for example, on workforce and what the KPIs are around delivery, how representative our workforce is, how inclusive our workforce is, because I think that we'll deliver better to residents if we are more in tune with the needs of residents in the borough. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Kim. As you're talking, it's making me think, I wonder if we're capturing interested parties as they give their feedback in case we need a kind of champions model in the community. I know we've got lots of people that we work with embedded in as well, but just a thought. And I had a final few reflections as I can't see hand up. One was just the phrasing on once COVID ends, I think, because
Chair, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but I think Chris has had his hand raised a couple of times now.
Sorry, Chris, if you've got a physical hand that I've missed there. Yeah, you must have the blood drained out of it by now if I've missed it for a while. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I have. And it really relates to a number of answers. I mean, like Kim's answer was interesting just now. It's very difficult to measure soft benefits from these things. Financial ones are very easy. The soft ones are much more difficult. And I'd like to go back to how many of these 4-year not experiments have there been? This is a second or third? Can anybody tell me? And can somebody tell me then, in their view, what's the one single measure that's come out of these 4-year progressions? And if they can also expand that one bit by saying, and what was the reason for that major shift? Can anybody answer those questions?
If I may, I'll start on the first part of the question, which is this will be the third 4-year plan. So we're very much in line with the Equalities Act, where we have a statutory duty to set out how we are responding to the protected characteristics. Trying to think about just one thing in terms of what we've achieved here. If I could pause on that one and think a little bit more about it, I would probably offer something around the visibility of the equalities agenda in Hammersmith and Fulham over the last 4-year term has dramatically increased. And I can say that for myself as a Black woman chief executive, the first Black woman chief executive in London in my lifetime of working in local government. There are now 3 in other boroughs. We have a strategic leadership team that includes people who have the protected characteristics, and we have in the leadership team. So we, in terms of our measure around diversity, inclusion and belonging, I think that if you look at our workforce, you would be able to see some of the metrics and some of the feedback. More important than the staff is about our agility in delivering better for residents. And I would give, it's difficult to think about one example, but COVID's very much at the front of my mind. And I can think about Dr. Nikki Lang, who is our Director of Public Health, talking to me about the events and the activities that she's been leading on with different communities to really spend time building trust around testing and vaccination hesitancy. And I think that our ability to be vocal about disproportionate impact is one of the things I think in the last year that I've seen in a way that I haven't seen before. She was at an event last week where there were, I think, 80 odd people, she said, from the Catholic community talking about vaccination hesitancy and her role as a doctor and a medical, from the medical profession, trying to allay people's fears. So we've done a lot more work in the last year that's reached deeper into communities, worked with mutual aid groups and our CAN initiatives to try and work out how shielded residents, for example, and their dietary requirements can be met. So I can think of lots of little examples of how I think we've been a lot bolder in the way in which we've tried to value residents and tried to make sure that we're working inclusively. But I'll pass the baton on to Emily or to Councillor Bennymore if there's anything else that stands out as a better example.
Thanks, Kim.
Councillor Bennymore, feel free to come in. I can see a hand.
Thanks. Yeah, if I may, I think actually, certainly what's happened over the last sort of year, I would say, is a significant working together with staff on this particular topic and this forum. And I'm going to ask him to remind me of the number of staff who now have specific roles within their departments in relation to equalities. And that's across the entire key recognising features. We've been doing all sorts of new stuff, and I actually want to pay huge tribute to the staff, because actually we all own this, don't we? And as the point was made, I think, by Councillor Johnson, this is a corporate approach. This is absolutely a corporate approach, but it's also a corporate approach that is being led significantly, not only by the administration, by staff themselves. And some of the examples of that have been extraordinary, and it has moved us on significantly. And I just wanted to thank all the staff who've put their hands up to say, yeah, you know what, I would like to lead on this particular area. We've been running LGBTQ history events, we've been running Black Lives Matter events, of all sorts of things. But the reason why they've happened is because staff have owned them. And it's been hugely beneficial to the whole organisation that it's owned by us all. So Kim, I can't remember how many we've got. And can you just share a bit of information about, you know, how that works so that the committee can scrutinise it? And you're on mute, darling. Sorry. It is, yeah, it's happened to all of us now.
Apologies. We have an initiative called H&F Way, which is the staff-led. One of the key values of the council is nothing about residents without residents, and the same for disabled residents. Well, we've got the same mantra for staff. So staff have been involved. There are 6 H&F Way working groups, and there are a number of spin-off initiatives where we've taken out some of the protected characteristics, and we've got some staff who are focusing on disability, some staff who are focusing on race, for example, LGBTQ initiatives as well, Black history, a whole raft. What I think it does is it allows our staff to bring their personality to the work, so that I think that in terms of customer care, we're better and stronger at that. We've still got some way to go always in trying to deliver excellence, but we have got a diverse workforce, which we're very proud of, and we value their voices. I think that most importantly in service provision and in trying to give the best offer to residents, that diverse workforce has helped us to think a little bit more about how we provide services. I can see good examples of that in children's services. I can definitely see that in adults, like the way in which we've modified or tried to improve provision in order to be more responsive to resident need.
Thanks very much, Kim. I think just if I may, there's explicit interventions and there's implicit as well. So the core business of a council is always going to be, you know, statutorily focused on people who are maybe more vulnerable in one way or another. So if you take even social housing, children's and adults, you know, funding and the way that we provided provisions there, if you look at implicitly which groups that is benefiting, that's substantive, and you know, so it's kind of in everything, and that there are some explicit measures and internal piece as well, which Kim and Sue have touched on. So we don't have any more hands up, but thank you for a very rich discussion there, and it's all very useful. I had a couple, just my final reflections, where the phrasing of once COVID ends might just need to be reviewed, just because with the variants and iterations that will be a while, and as it's 2021, might just be worth editing. And the other is education is implicit or mentioned in several, but as it's sort of like such a core foundation, I wonder whether that could just be lifted up slightly, but that was just my read on it, and perhaps as it's fleshed out, it will be really obvious in industrial strategy or some of the other sections in there. So that was just my thoughts as well, but thank you so much to everyone. And
thank you.
Would welcome, please do feedback either via the survey or get in touch if you want to talk about it, you know, through in more detail. I'm sure we'd welcome conversations as well. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much for everyone's input, and thank you, Kim, Councillor Fenimore and Emily for speaking to it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that's a great platform, and we look forward to kind of hearing more about that in due course and building that into the way we scrutinise in this pack. And it's a good lead in fact, to our second paper, item 5, the 2022 budget context. I suppose to just give a precursor to this, we obviously meet tonight on the cusp of a new financial year, where the last, the one we're still in and had just gone, has been fairly extraordinary. So given the backdrop of that, the decade of austerity, which we're still feeling the lag of, and, you know, gloomily possibly anticipation of future cuts due to the kind of COVID and the government stance on this, we just wanted to take stock of where we really need to focus attention to maintain financial health, and how we develop new approaches to our savings, efficiencies and additional income. So this report is going to set out kind of background of a medium-term financial planning process and be contextualised with national and local information. And as we've mentioned before as a theme in this pack, we have a commitment as a council, obviously, to delivering more for less. And we've got particular priorities around both ruthless financial efficiency, but also jointly being a compassionate council. And we hold those two principles in tandem. And it's worth mentioning that since 2014, we've taken out the annual budget from just shy of 182 million to 124 million. So that's removing 58 million pounds worth of spend. So we've been lean. There are challenges. COVID has brought particular challenges. So there are kind of three questions, I suppose, if we hold in our minds as we're having this presentation. The first is, to review what the biggest financial issues are that are facing us or coming down the track. The second is, what are the most impactful opportunities to exploit or look into? And some of them might not be something we can come up with tonight. That's absolutely fine. It's just to start identifying areas where we can have some meaty interventions. And the third is, what do we need to understand in more detail in order to develop this policy? Do we need more data or a bit more digging in certain areas? So if people can hold those questions in their minds, that would be great. And I will hand over without further ado to Emily Hill, our Director of Finance, to present this paper, and also I believe Andrew Lord, who's going to be helping as well.
Thanks, Chair. You've introduced perfectly, and I'm not sure there's a lot left for me to introduce. But as you say, what the purpose of this paper is, we've just last month agreed this current year's budget that starts the 1st of April tomorrow. We are on the last day of our financial year, but we must turn already to setting the budget for 22-23 and looking to the medium term on that. There are some difficulties certainly in doing so, and so what this paper does sets out the context, as you say, of national finances and how we think at the moment that's likely to play out for us. The picture of Hammersmith and Fulham to date, as you say, we've made significant savings, and continuing to find savings is increasingly difficult. Really some of those key factors that we will now be considering as we enter into planning for the next budget round. So I think it's probably important to say that had I been making this presentation 18 months ago, I might have been optimistic about an end to austerity, really. The huge financial cost of COVID nationally and messaging in the recent budget announcements this month really indicate, unfortunately, that we may be starting to look at a renewed austerity programme. So real risks, really, certainly of real terms local government funding cuts, but potentially even cash term funding cuts as the budget looks to reduce the level of borrowing over the next over the medium term and at the same time protecting a number of departments of which local government unfortunately is not one. So we've got quite significant uncertainty in local government funding, some risks to local government funding overall, but added to that, potential for government policy to particularly impact boroughs like Hammersmith and Fulham. So concerns that policy objectives such as levelling up or fair funding will move money away from potential inner city deprived boroughs like Hammersmith and Fulham to other areas. So unfortunately, as well as the national picture, there are some concerns that Hammersmith and Fulham, or boroughs like Hammersmith and Fulham, may be worse off than even the national picture. I think in terms of that national picture, that kind of funding outlook is difficult when an economic downturn may also increase the demand on our services and the potential for pent-up demand as a result of COVID that we might start to see coming through in the next year. So I guess sort of key messages really that sort of local government funding has sort of reduced. We're working with a quarter less in real terms than we would per person before austerity hit. And we are seeing the sector under quite significant strain as a result. So we've seen Croydon issuing Section 114 notices. We've seen a number of councils receiving through this budget some government support in terms of sort of capitalisation directions, and I can try to explain that if anybody wants me to. And so in general, a sector under strain. Hammersmith and Fulham has responded really well to austerity to date, as you say, making significant savings whilst dealing with increased demand and increased cost, with savings exceeding growth by 61 million since 14-15. So it has responded well to austerity to date. Questions over how much further the council is able to take out further spend while still delivering statutory services and priority services to residents. So in terms of 2021, we've clearly set a balanced budget, continue to have identified savings, but also needed to put significant additional funding in relation to COVID pressures and also demand-led growth. So you see most of our growth in children's social care and adult social care to deal with increased costs in those services and also increases in demand. And that increase in demand is really a pressure as we look forward to setting the budget next year. So that there will be some certain uncertainties over unmet demand, but in any case, we still expect increase in demand and complexity in demand for adult social care and children and homelessness, potentially in an economic downturn. There often is a link between economic downturn and conditions and demand for our services, needs-based services. Inflation as well. Whilst we were looking at low inflation recently, we've seen recent expectations that inflation will increase over the medium term. So that will cause significant stress if our government funding is neutral in cash terms, even more so if it's negative in cash terms. They're really the key areas that we look forward to next year to try to manage when trying to understand our grant funding. I think as we look into the medium term, it's increasingly difficult. We have had now a number of annual year settlements, whereas in previous years you have had 4-year settlements, which does enable you to plan better in the medium term. We will not know this year's settlement till the autumn, the 22-23 settlement till the autumn, so less than 6 months before the start of the financial year. So we do our best to guess what that will be based on announcements and policy announcements, but we won't know until likely the autumn. I think I've also set out some more medium-term concerns around funding as the government announces other policy decisions on funding of social care, the fair funding review, and its review of business rates. So a number of big policy decisions as well that will start to affect our funding. So that's an overview really of the detail in the report, and happy to take any questions that you might have. As you say, also very pleased to take any suggestions as to how we look to close that gap in future years.
Great, thank you very much, Emily. And actually, if I just before I take questions, which I'm sure will hone in on different aspects of it, Obviously, there's a lot of contingency and, without meaning to use this word uncertainty, but certain decisions haven't been made at national level, certain things haven't played out in terms of economic impact. But in terms of the process for kind of modelling scenarios or anticipating that at different points in the year, I wondered if you could talk through, for the benefit of everyone dialing in or on the call, how that process works and what the checks and balances are, timings, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, so around now we will come up with a first model, and that will include a sort of best case and a worst case, as well as a expected case or a medium case, I guess, and then essentially we will continue to revisit that as announcements are made, or as we look and we understand, say, trends in inflation or other trends. So we would sort of set a gap quite early on. Around now we're working on that and agreeing that. And then it's almost under continual review, and it's done as, once we've set a gap, we need to identify actions and plans to mitigate that gap and to close that gap. And it's whilst we're doing that, we're also revisiting the assumptions that we came to the gap at the same time.
Great, thank you very much. I will pause on my points and invite questions or further points of explanation needed from the floor. Let's kind of get into this in some detail, and again, bearing in mind at all times what the issues and also where you think there might be an opportunity to kind of exploit a gap as well. So do we have anyone who wants to go first? Councillor Quigley.
Hi Emily, thanks for doing the report. Just for clarification for me, are you saying in blunt terms that the government isn't giving out enough money to councils?
I'm saying that we expect the funding that the government's provided to reduce over time, which would mean that councils do need to reassess and consider the services and the spending that they have. The government expectation previously has been a sort of core spending power assessment. Within that core spending power assessment, it sort of suggests that councils do need more money, but they expect council tax to be raised as part of that funding of government services. So there's a kind of policy position by government that increased costs incurred by councils might be expected to be raised by council tax rather than government funding.
Okay, so I kind of understand what you're saying, but furlough ends at the end of August, September, potentially more unemployment up and down the country. How are people supposed to pay this council tax? I mean, we're in very uncertain times. Hopefully things will get better, but it just seems unrealistic for the government to be expecting councils and local residents who are potentially going to be unemployed to be, could they not forecast this? I mean, it just seems. It seems irresponsible.
In terms of sort of COVID and the financial pressures, you're quite right, Councillor Quigley, and because council tax is such a significant income stream for the council, it is something that we monitor very carefully, and we are seeing a reduction in the collection rate, reflecting that financial strain I think that residents are under. I would say that this council particularly does have a significant and a generous council tax support scheme for people on low income, and so our sort of collection rates may not suffer as far as others do, but that scheme that is provided by the council does have a cost to the council, so the council essentially pays for that.
Yeah, and that's what I think I'm getting at in a roundabout way, that it just seems very irresponsible, given that what we've gone through in the last year or so, that potentially 6-9 months down the line we are very supportive council to our residents. We do our best, but actually, you know, they could end up with it's just irresponsible. I can't think of any other word to use, Emily. I mean, and it's a very worrying time. Yeah, but thank you.
I think there is a significant amount of uncertainty that does make it a worrying time, as you say, for council finances, local government finances overall. You've heard me talk before. I believe that we've set a cautious budget which has included contingencies and things that we need, and that we have an adequate cushion of reserves in relation to managing any sort of untoward events. But certainly it is a worrying time in terms of continuing increase in demand and costs, and potentially no increases in government funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, both. Councillor Schmidt, you had your hand up briefly. Did you want to come in, or?
I was just going to make the point that Emily made about the fact that we have the full relief for on council tax benefit, which, without going into the whole story on this, because we've discussed it before, a lot of councils don't offer full council tax benefit to residents that are on benefits, but we've always maintained a full council tax benefit. So if residents are on full benefits, which obviously is sadly becoming more frequent in light of COVID-19's economic impacts, we completely take them out of council tax, and they don't have to pay that until they're back on their feet. That makes it sound like they're going to have to pay it when they won't pay it for the period of time they're on benefits. It doesn't build up a debt. They don't qualify for council tax while they're on full benefits.
Great, thank you very much for that clarification. Tony.
Hi, Chair. Yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder, but just to let the committee know that you're pushing us quite strongly as co-optees to both investigate very carefully, as you said, how to be ruthlessly financially efficient, and to get more for less. So my point is just that I think we're because we're all stepping up to a certain extent, and I think we're going to try and do a lot more to look at areas where we can get more for less, but to be more efficient, but possibly also areas where we can get more revenue. And it's going to be a very dynamic time, because depending on who you believe, a lot of the big investment banks are actually expecting some significant turnaround in the economy, even to the extent that inflation becomes a problem later in the year. So we maybe want to be flexible enough and responsive enough to allow ourselves to take advantage of an upturn in business, maybe office rates or something like that. So my point is, I think we should, and you may say this anyway, we should ask openly anybody. There's a lot of councillors, a lot of other people attending, for ideas in the next period on how we can either be more efficient, to use different methods of delivering services for efficiency, or potentially increase revenues, and then we can bring them back to the pack, which I think is part of our responsibility, and we're up for the job. I know you are, at least anyway.
Great, thank you so much, Tony. And I might, I'll take Eric's question next, but then I might drill down, Emily, into some of the areas that you mentioned, which I know are sort of significant changes, or some of the bigger kind of areas for us to have focus on. But I'll go first to Eric, and then we'll come back to sort of drill down into some of the aspects of the report in more detail. So Eric.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to sort of look at, and thank you very much, Emily, for the report. It was really easy to understand and actually understand where actually some of the development, or where some of the additional support might come from. I think I've got various questions, and maybe the chair can tell me to stop at some point. But I think the first one is this business rates issue that you've raised in various areas in your report. We see a reduction from this year to next year, but I'm not sure. Then there's comments about that we might see an even further reduction due to the government looking at business rates in a slightly different way. It'd be interesting to find out how much modelling you've done and different scenarios you've looked at, and what is currently represented in the following year's figures, what assumptions you've made, and whether or not there are any, whether or not we should be looking at more at a bit more at even more scenario analysis. There was this question as well about the capital budget, that some councils are being asked to basically take the capital and put that into areas that normally in council financing or local authority financing wouldn't be allowed. I'm just a bit worried that we have built up quite good sort of capital sources of income, and they are meant for capital projects and meant to deliver larger projects and also take advantage or sort of reflect the increase in residents. So we're going from 80,000 to 85,000, and that will need bigger infrastructure, and some of those receipts from section 106 and sales will be used for that. But if we're suddenly having to use that for propping up the council finances, that might be a problem. So my point there is that the report looks like we've done extremely well at managing our finances over the last period of time. I'm wondering whether or not we might get penalized for managing our finances so well, that as this rebalancing occurs, that they don't look to us and say, well, those guys, don't have to worry about them. They always seem to get take up rabbit out of the hat kind of thing. And then we realize that actually there are no more rabbits, because we've spent the last 10 years finding all those rabbits, and we're stuck there with a sort of with a government grant which really doesn't help us. So I'm wondering whether or not we shouldn't be looking at our finances and looking at the way we present our finances and all of those pots in a slightly different way. Hopefully maybe not showing that we're so good at what we do. The fact, there was one other piece, and I'll maybe keep to that, which is saying that there is this element that local authority financing won't be ring-fenced, but schools are ring-fenced. I know that a number of our schools don't come under this, but it'd be interesting to find out what's happened with the project of looking at our schools estate and getting more value from that schools estate. Because obviously we do own them, we do own the rent. Theoretically, the rent comes back to us. I'm not quite sure how that whole thing works, but there are potentially options there of getting more value out of that, and also that's obviously capital receipts as well. I might just leave it at that, because otherwise I'll be going on all night.
Thanks, Eric. That's brilliant. So I've got business rate scenario analysis, capital budgets, question mark, are we too good at adapting to austerity, and at what point do we sort of need to delineate between areas where we can still be more efficient versus where really we're kind of up against a wall, and schools estate. So I don't know if Emily or anyone else wants to come in on any of those.
I'll try to take them one by one. So business rates. So we set out in the report actually a real risk around something called the material change in circumstances that local business rate payers may seek, which would mean that their business rates revenues would be reduced. In the tax day, not the budget day, but the tax day that was separate, actually, they've suggested a change of law where they're not going to allow these material change in circumstances, and instead have proposed that they will government will provide more reliefs to businesses or support for their business rate bills which would sort of mitigate that risk to material change in circumstances to local government. So that one, so although it's in the report since dispatch, that law has changed. So and that could have significant impacts essentially on revenue. So these do change swiftly, but what we had modelled what we thought that might do to our base. We take some advice on business rates advisors to do that. Whilst we do model those, the risk in terms of the financial planning to the council, at least under the current regime, is minimal. What we do at the council for our forecasting and modelling purposes is we model on what's called the safety net, which is a minimum amount of business rates revenue that the government would guarantee. And if we were to fall below that, they would top us up really with a safety net payment. So in terms of the council's individual position as a single council on that, we bear little risk in relation to that because we model at that safety net. The reason that we do that is historically, particularly with regards to sort of Westfield and the opening, we had a very high level of business rate appeals, and therefore we've for a number of years modelled on the safety net. So under the current regime, we're actually sort of modelling at the safety net, which is a reasonable expectation, and we will be at the safety net, we think, this year. So we bear not a lot of risk in our modelling on that. Where the risk will come in is the wider review of business rates and business rates funding that happens and the government is considering, and whether it would take away that safety net or how business rates will be distributed to local government in the future. So that would take some time to implement, but certainly for our modelling at the moment under the current regime, I'm satisfied we've got a very prudent position and a realistically prudent position rather than overly prudent position.
Great, thanks very much, Emily. And Eric, did you want to come back in?
No, sorry, it was just on that one point. I was, I think we mentioned this in the last one about the safety net. I was just looking at because obviously we're looking at 2021, 22, but we're also looking at the idea of what happens next.
Yeah.
And if this risk has been identified, we should be not necessarily looking at it in a sort of a single silo, because obviously, there is a response to it, but as part of the larger sort of rejig in finances. We've seen what's happened in the last 10 years under austerity. We were thinking, as you said before, we were thinking about, we can be a bit optimistic now. They're not going to bash us again, but actually now we're expecting to be, potentially properly bashed, and we might be bashed more because there's a rejigging of settlements across the country. Plus, also, we've shown that we're very good with less, and we could get clobbered for that as well.
Thanks.
So I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Yes, just to say, you're right, and certainly we will need to keep an eye on those developments in business rates, and it does appear that a tax on businesses that are based on the property space in a world of e-commerce and e-business and not using much space doesn't necessarily appear to be the right way to tax services, and certainly wouldn't reflect the need within individual boroughs. So there's likely to have to be some redistribution of business rates in some way, shape or form, because we know, a number of places will not have the business rates base that we have across the country. Should I move to the next question, Chair, on capital?
Yes, please do. Yes, sorry, I realised we're on 2 of 4. Yep, please do.
So yes, you're right. You're quite right, Eric. What's happened to a number of councils under significant financial pressure is that they have been provided what's called a capitalisation direction by the MHCLG, the department. I think the risk that you mentioned it isn't likely to be a risk, or certainly not the way that capitalisation directions are currently understood. In the local authority, as you say, we've got different rules on what's capital and what's revenue, and local authorities are only allowed to borrow for capital purposes. So we're not allowed to borrow for cash flow and revenue purposes, only for capital purposes. And so these capitalisation directions allow those boroughs that have been granted them to do is to treat revenue expenditure as capital, so to capitalise it, which then allows them to pay that off over time, so to spread the cost of say a 20 million capitalisation direction over the next 50 years. So it's essentially making revenue capital, but it's not necessarily saying, oh, and you should use developer contribution receipts to fund that. The rules that apply to developer contributions, SIL section 106, there are legislative requirements around those. Similarly with sort of capital receipts from right to buy purchases, there are legislative requirements as to how we're able to apply those. So it doesn't, that doesn't particularly concern me, that the capitalisation directions would mean that some of those receipts that we expect to invest in our borough for, as you say, infrastructure, affordable housing, other things, as this committee knows, because it sees a lot of detail on SIL and section 106, won't be diverted, and in fact can't be diverted for those purposes. I would also say that, you know, those capitalisation directions are the very last resort in stopping and supporting those boroughs in not having to issue sort of section 114 arrangements, you know, so that they're a very last resort, and as you would expect from me, I'm not expecting the council to ever need to, or certainly in the medium term, to need to use that and to make an application to the Secretary of State for those purposes. They're an extreme mechanism, very, very rarely used, and it quite significant that there were so many that have recently been issued by MHCLG.
Thanks, Emily.
Shall I carry on?
To 3 or 4?
Thank you. Have we done well? I think this council particularly has well, and I can take no credit for it having only been in place for a year, has done well in reducing the cost and still delivering the level of the services that it does do, and the policies that it does decide on. I think you're right in that thought around we've done well, would we just be expected to keep doing well? And I think local government as a sector actually is at risk of that, because it has done so well. It's seen this biggest proportionate reduction in government funding over that last 10 years than any other department, and has continuing to deliver the statutory services as a whole, with, yes, a few in recent years financial failures, but as a whole, the sector has done particularly well. So that there is a risk in this austerity too, as government seeks to reduce spend and repay borrowing, that it will look to local government, because it has been so successful in reducing its spend. And I think that's difficult, because local government has done such a lot of work already. It feels that there isn't any more to find. So I think as a sector, that's a risk. Is it a risk to an individual authority? Probably not. In that the way that there will be policies that will channel money to different priorities, government priorities, and Hammersmith, Fulham, as I said, are likely to probably be losers in that, in terms of levelling up and fair funding, but it will do so at a policy level rather than at an individual borough level. So it won't look to individual boroughs in considering a settlement. It will have to have a formula through which it will do that. So there are areas that we will be at risk as a borough, but not particularly in relation to where we've done. We do sometimes suffer because we do have a historically low council tax. And so there are expectations where they expect we would have been able to increase our revenues where we can't anymore, and where they expect a certain increase in council tax. Of course, when you increase a low level, it's a smaller absolute amount than when you increase the same percentage of a higher amount. So there are some areas where Hammersmith and Fulham become disadvantaged from a government funding perspective, but it's at a higher policy level than an individual authority performance level.
Thank you. I've left an ellipsis for you to
for the final
one. Straight on, Emily.
So the final one was around review and consideration of the school's estate. That continues to be considered and options considered. Schools are important assets and they are aged, and a number of schools do need significant investment to ensure that our pupils have fit for purpose buildings in which to learn. So those are being considered. There isn't any significant capital funds that are available from the DFE for complete school renewal. So options will be considered and taken through the relevant decision-making process as feasible options come forward. In terms of, you talked about the use of capital receipts. There's no expectation that these would need to deliver capital receipts, and in fact it may be quite difficult to do so because of the feasibility of generating a capital receipt, as well as creating new and modern school buildings.
Thanks, Emily. Eric, did you want to come back on any of that?
I think, sorry, the point on the schools estate was never to make money from it. It was more that any money surplus made from a redistribution of those assets and developing those assets could then be used on those financing requirements such as child services. So obviously if those receipts could support that, then obviously there'd be less of a strain on the child services side. So that's what
agreed. And I think that there was sorry, through you, Chair. There was a discussion, particularly because we had an issue in relation to high needs. So you're correct. There was that discussion. We're currently we've had some discussions with the DFE with regards to high needs, and we hope those to be resolved a sort of different way. So they're no longer required in order to resolve our high needs issues. But yes, you're correct that there are other things that we could use capital receipts for if we wanted to invest in affordable housing and other regeneration and community asset schemes if we had them. But that sort of pressure that I think you're mentioning, we're looking to resolve it through other means.
Thanks very much, Emily. Eric, did you have any final, or did you want to come in again?
No,
Please feel free.
I'll spare everyone. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, I believe Chris had his hand up earlier.
Don't worry, I did spot it. Chris, even though you're shrinking into darkness, I gather a hand is up. Do go for it.
Yes, just a few points. I'm probably addressed to Max. Max, I like your new haircut, by the way, or non-haircut.
Lack of haircut, yeah.
On expenditure, there are things within our remit and there are things without our remit. And I do believe we just have to focus on those within our remit. And they should be the subject of in-depth investigation when we're doing zero-based budgeting. Income, commercial revenue, well, that's obvious. We should look at every opportunity that we have. And I take Eric's point that the better use of our capital estate should be a focus of our attention. I disagree with Eric on we're good at doing more with less, and we should look at that. I think we should be proud of that. And we should ask ourselves, maybe we had too much to begin with, and maybe we were so inefficient to begin with. With regard to capitalisation direction, which Emily was talking about, I think that's just wonderful. And Derek Hatton, I'm sure, would make great use of it. And I don't think we should touch it with a barge pole unless it goes through so much scrutiny that it almost makes it impossible. Just those few points, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll forgive you for referring to me as Chairman.
Oh, sorry. I'm older than you.
No, don't worry. It's slip of the tongue. Don't worry at all. Thank you for that, Chris. And I think that your point about delineating between our statutory and non-statutory obligations will help us segment out and make the message clearer, because Emily, you've mentioned in this discussion, we have, it's highly complex, the range of services we deliver, the kind of nexus of all the different considerations, pressures, growing demand, shrinking and different financial arrangements is hard to compute. And I think it's something that co-optees have raised about having something succinct, or acid test, could you explain this to your neighbour, I think is a worthwhile point. And Eric's point on the kind of burning bridge, and at what point have we absorbed too much efficiency, which is a debatable point, and all that kind of thing. But the clearer it is to articulate what we've done and the value delivered, the better that message is, and is communicated and in public knowledge. And that's when policymakers and the government start responding, because when people recognise it, then it's not this kind of invisible cut anymore. And on that, I wondered, Emily, doesn't need to be hugely cumbersome, but I wondered if you could just outline, if you would, in a few points, the social care aspects of the report that you've done very well of writing, but just for the benefit of people watching, if we were going to give them a whistle stop of that trajectory or the particular pressures and the COVID interface of that, what that looks like for our finances.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean the social care side is a significant element of our budget, and the vast majority of that spend is spent directly on adult residents and children residents, and placements and home care charges and other direct payments in relation to their care. So of a sort of gross budget of 164, it's almost 60 of that is social care, and children's 51. So if you sort of, and then the next sort of department down is environment, which is 40. So I sort of think it was 60, 50, 40 out of 164. So that's a significant amount of our budget. They are on placements essentially for adults. We have roughly sort of 2,500 adult residents that we support through home care, direct payments and placements. Home care costs being the significant proportion of that. And ensuring that we pay our home care providers the sort of London living wage. We've seen increases in costs of those over the years. We've also seen over the last number of years increasing complexity in the needs of our residents, which increases the cost of those. So as well as seeing numbers increase, we actually see increased costs and increased complexity. Particularly in relation to COVID, and you'll all be very aware that in this pandemic, being in a hospital isn't necessarily the best place to be. So we've had to deal with a lot of sort of additional costs of hospital discharges, additional costs of PPE, and other costs in relation to sort of cleaning, for example, and additional costs to support our providers in ensuring that they provide COVID safe care. So that's adults. In relation to children, we see quite a significant variance in the prices of care for placements, which can range, to relatively moderate places up to very significant costs for secure residential care, in the region of hundreds of thousands for on an annual basis. So, excuse me, again, increased costs in relation to COVID on those. So social care really takes a significant part of the budget, and they are the sort of, as Chris talked about, they're those kind of statutory services which are very much demand led. So yes, some work that the council can do in relation to trying to preventative work to ensure people don't move up to those sort of higher level interventions or more complex care need, but in general driven by population factors and the needs of those individuals.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. That's great to have that overview. I don't have any more questions, so unless anyone wants to make any final comments, I will move on. So I think, thank you, Emily. It's really, in many ways, it's sort of almost slightly overwhelming, not just the pressures, but how much we don't know yet. So thank you for remaining kind of like solid and fully kind of conversant with all of that detail. That's great. I suppose I'll move us, we have an item next on our work programme. I suppose it's really just to give a nod to the fact that we are considering lots of kind of meaty and substantial aspects of finances. And I know I've spoken to co-optees, members individually about, and officers about what some of those priorities will be. So we will, I suppose, in this period, in the next few months, where of course we've got further, we can do some work kind of structuring that and pulling that into a programme. But I will summarise actions now as I've heard them, and I know that Bathsheba's capturing everything as well. But to go through on papers, the qualities paper, we have points around making sure that we include and address particular groups and be really explicit about them, and that data can capture a certain amount, and we should definitely be data driven in the way that we're analysing, measuring both who to identify and also our impact, but recognising that there are lots of groups that are missing in data. And that's why the unique position we have obviously as local government is that we have lots of nodes into communities to be able to identify that. But we will have a strong lens on metric and KPIs in line with our commitment about being the best. So whether that's measuring on individual level and the kind of impact, or benchmarking against other councils, I'm sure that will be worked up. And also the ROI, is Eric's point on investment, our return on investment for our investment in council tax. We've had commitment that we're going to get reports back, which is fantastic, and we can lens that then for our policy development. And lots of the areas we've spoken about tonight are obviously addressing some of those sort of more vulnerable groups and interface with equalities very, very strongly. And I like Tony's point about this being a very critical time post-COVID, so we can definitely use that as part of our kind of post-COVID measurement as well. And also Councillor Johnson's point about just making sure, and it is, but just to really demonstrate how it's holistic, and I suppose some of the work programme underneath the pledges about how it will be embedded into all council policy or working. And then on the budget paper that we've just had, which I know is almost so broad it's hard to know exactly what to look at, but we had some great points from Eric around business rate scenario analysis, and Chris about distinguishing between statutory and non-statutory, and perhaps we can present some of that information as we go through and be more distinct about that, about what we have, where we don't have choice about delivering, or where we can choose and have a record of kind of why we're deciding on the choices that we are and the impact that that's making, and some questions around capital estate and whether we can look again at that to generate receipts for reinvestment. We've spoken before, and I think there's fairly good consensus now for some concerted work on adult social care, because we know we've obviously got a kind of, as the report said, a 20% increase in people receiving 28 plus hours of care in the week over the last 5 years. And then that's coupled with our population trajectory of which will be growing by 6.3% from 2018 to 2028. So these are, you know, figures that make you sit up a little bit. It's at national level, there's been a lot of deliberation between whether there's going to be an insurance model or more of a state-backed model, because catastrophic care costs are very hard to predict. So it would be really interesting to get into all the different aspects of that. And we can see from the report we've just had that, in fact, if we look at the spend and we want to make a big impact in an area of that, then this is a good place to start, and by no means exhaustive. And I know that there are lots of different areas that different groups wanted to work on. And then the final point is just around maybe bringing back some of that modelling, that ongoing financial modelling to this pack, so that we've always got a bit of a sense check in on that best and worst or expected scenario. So thank you, Emily, for giving us the detail on how that's worked up. And the final thing to note is just the date of the future meetings. So we are due to a kind of PERDA ahead of the mayorals. We are next, therefore, going to be meeting on Wednesday, the 28th of July. And unless there's any other business, then I will sum up there. So would anyone like to make any final comments or reflections? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, and very happy new financial year, or not possibly from tomorrow onwards, but thank you so much for joining, and we'll be back on the 28th of July. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks. Bye-bye.